The VC who made $50 million and spent $15,000 to buy her silence. She was 30, he was 48. She wanted marriage. He wanted a mistress. Chapter 1. The summit. The rain came down sideways over Manhattan on the evening of October 14th, 2 years ago, turning the streets of Midtown into a river of amber headlights and umbrellas. Giselle Marchetti stood beneath the awning of the Conrad Hotel on 6th Avenue, clutching an event program and trying not to shiver in her second-hand theory blazer. She was 28, 2 months out of Columbia Business School, and the job market felt like a door that had closed the moment she'd walked through the commencement gates. The lobby of the hotel was electric. Tech Summit East was in its 3rd year, and this year the organizers had pulled out all the stops: a glass-walled ballroom, a string quartet playing something tasteful and unobtrusive, waiters circulating with champagne flutes and salmon tartare. The attendee list read like a who's who of New York's venture capital elite, partners from Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, Bessemer, a handful of names so big they'd become adjectives. Giselle had come because her former classmate, a guy named Derek who now worked at First Round Capital, had offered her his spare badge. "You never know," he'd said, which was startup speak for "I have no idea how to help you, but this seems plausible." She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing there, networking, angling, performing the particular American ritual of pretending that meeting someone powerful was an organic, serendipitous accident when really it was the whole point. She was working the room, smiling at strangers, making small talk about AI infrastructure and Syriza trends, when she saw him. Victor Ashford stood near the window overlooking the rain-slicked avenue, holding a glass of sparkling water like it was a prop. He was tall, about 6 feet, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he'd played some sport in another life, with silver threading through dark hair that was cropped short and neat. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and his watch, visible beneath his French cuff, caught the light with the understated confidence of something that had never needed to announce itself. He was laughing at something a younger man had said, and the laugh was warm, genuine, the kind of laugh that made people lean in rather than pull back. When it ended, he said something quietly, and the younger man nodded with visible relief, as if he'd just been handed a verdict. Giselle knew him. Everyone in her world knew him. Victor Ashford, managing partner at Ashford Crane Ventures. Harvard MBA, class of '98. One of the first generation of American venture capitalists to build their reputations on internet-era deals. He'd backed 3 unicorns in the early 2000s and quietly accumulated a fortune that Forbes estimated at somewhere north of $50 million. He was a fixture at events like this, the kind of man who was quoted in the Wall Street Journal and whose startups dropped names in pitch decks just to signal that someone credible had passed through. She also knew, from a Financial Times profile she'd read on the subway, that he lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, with his wife of 22 years and their 2 sons. The older one was at Dartmouth. The younger was applying. She watched him for a moment longer than she should have. Then he glanced up, caught her eye, and smiled. Not a professional smile. Not a networking smile. Something warmer, more curious, as if he recognized something in her expression. Maybe the particular hunger of someone who was working the room but wished she wasn't. He excused himself from the younger man and walked toward her. "You look like you're trying to decide whether to come over or pretend you were heading somewhere else," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, carrying the faint rasp of someone who'd spent years speaking in boardrooms. "That obvious," she said. "To someone who's been on the other side of that look a few thousand times." He extended his hand. Victor Ashford. Giselle Marchetti. She shook his hand. His grip was firm, brief, confident. "I just graduated from Columbia Business School. 2 months ago. I'm currently between opportunities. Between opportunities. He smiled. That's a very diplomatic way to say unemployed and panicking. Was that in my posture or my blazer? Both. But the blazer is fine. The posture needs work. Shoulders back. You're not asking for charity, you're offering talent. Act like it. She straightened her shoulders. Better? Getting there. He studied her for a moment, the way a doctor studies an X-ray, quickly, but with the ease of someone who'd seen thousands of them. What did you specialize in at Columbia? Finance or management? Finance. And I spent 3 years before the MBA working in equity research at a mid-size asset manager. I wanted to go into VC. VC. He said it the way a fisherman might say trout, appreciative, but only of a certain kind. That's a crowded room. What makes you different? She could have given him her rehearsed answer, the one she used in interviews. But something about the directness of his question invited the same back. I'm not sure I'm different, she said. I think I just want it more than most people who say they want it. I grew up in a town in New Jersey where my mother worked 2 jobs and my father was a concept. I got myself through college, then got into Columbia on scholarship, and I'm standing at this party in a blazer I bought at a consignment shop because I believe that if I work hard enough and smart enough, I can build something. That's not original. But it's true. He looked at her for a long moment. The string quartet played on. That, he said quietly, was the best answer I've heard all year. He pulled out his phone. Give me your number. I'm having lunch on Friday with a woman named Dana Whitmore. She runs the portfolio management team at Meridian Investment Partners. They're always looking for people with your background. Let me make an introduction. Victor Ashford just offered to make me an introduction to Dana Whitmore, she said slowly, as if saying it aloud might make it evaporate. Has that sunk in yet? No. Good. Don't let it sink in. Call my assistant tomorrow and she'll set it up. And Giselle? He handed her his card, heavy stock, embossed lettering, the kind that cost $20 to print and was worth considerably more in access. Don't undersell yourselves. You earned your place in that room. Act like it. She took the card. Their fingers touched for a moment. Thank you, she said. He smiled, that warm, genuine smile again, the one that made her feel like she'd passed some invisible test. Good luck, Giselle Marchetti. I have a feeling we'll be talking again. He turned and walked back into the crowd. She watched him go, holding his card in her hand like it was something holy. Chapter 2. The job she called his assistant the next morning. The assistant, a crisp, efficient woman named Pauline, set up the lunch for the following Thursday at a small Italian restaurant near Union Square. Dana Whitmore was a tall, elegant black woman in her early 50s who wore a silk head wrap and spoke about portfolio management the way artists speak about painting, with a reverence that made the subject feel alive. I don't usually take meetings through referrals, Dana said over white wine and linguine, but Victor Ashford doesn't make referrals. When he calls me, I pick up. So either you're extraordinary, or he owes you a favor. Maybe both, Giselle said, surprising herself. Dana laughed. I like her. Tell me about your research work. The interview lasted 2 hours. By the following Monday, Giselle had an offer letter, analyst, portfolio management, $135,000 a year plus bonus. She called her mother in New Brunswick and cried in the bathroom of her studio apartment for 20 minutes. The job was everything she'd worked toward. The team was sharp, the work was interesting, and Dana Whitmore turned out to be not just a brilliant investor but a generous mentor. She taught Giselle how to read a balance sheet the way a detective reads a crime scene, looking for the details that didn't add up, the places where the story being told was different from the story being hidden. Giselle was good at her job. She was promoted to associate after 14 months, and by the time she turned 29, she was leading due diligence on 2 of the firm's mid-stage investments. She saw Victor occasionally, at industry events, at the occasional charity gala that Dana insisted she attend to build her network. He was always warm, always charming, always married. He'd mention his sons, his wife, his life in Greenwich, with the easy comfort of a man who had built exactly the life he'd planned. He never once looked at Giselle with anything other than professional respect. And then, on a Thursday evening in late November, 14 months after the tech summit, she ran into him at a rooftop bar in Tribeca. He was alone. His wife, he explained, was in Connecticut with the boys for Thanksgiving prep. He was in the city for a board meeting and had decided to have a drink alone before driving back. "Join me," he said. She did. The conversation started the way it always did, a work, markets, a startup they'd both looked at and passed on. But then he asked about her personal life, and she found herself telling him about her ex-boyfriend, a nice enough guy from her Columbia cohort who'd broken up with her 6 months earlier because, as he'd put it, "You're too ambitious for me." She laughed about it, but Victor didn't laugh. "That's the stupidest reason I've ever heard for losing someone," he said. "Anyone who can't handle your ambition doesn't deserve you." She looked at him. Really looked at him. The silver in his hair. The lines around his eyes. The way he held his glass, loosely, confidently, like everything else in his life. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For saying that. Even if you don't mean it." "I always mean it." Their eyes held. Something shifted in the air between them, a change in pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Giselle," he said quietly. "I know." She pulled back, physically, shifting in her chair. "You're married. It doesn't have to be this complicated. Doesn't it?" She finished her drink. "I should go. Let me at least call you a car." "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was the opposite of fine. She was standing on the roof of a building in Tribeca with a 47-year-old married man and realizing, with a clarity that felt like ice water, that she was falling in love with him. She took the subway home. She did not call the car. Chapter 3. The beginning 2 weeks later, on a cold December evening, Giselle was working late at the office when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's Victor. I got your number from Dana. Are you free for dinner tonight?" She stared at the message for a full minute. Then she typed, "Where?" He suggested a restaurant in the West Village, a small, dark, candlelit place with tables faced far enough apart that you could have a private conversation without being overheard. She knew the type. She'd never been to one. She arrived at 8. He was already there, at a corner table, wearing a dark sweater and jeans, the first time she'd seen him in anything other than a suit. He looked younger. More human. "You look surprised," he said as she sat down. "I am." "You look different." "Different good or different alarming?" "Different human." He laughed. "I'll take it." They ordered. They talked. The conversation flowed with the ease that felt almost dangerous, the kind of conversation you can only have with someone when you know, on some level, that you probably shouldn't be having it. He told her about his early days in VC, back when venture capital was still a small enough world that deals were handshake agreements and reputation was everything. He told her about the first company he'd backed, a small software firm in Boston that he discovered through a colleague at a conference, back when he was 29 and still an analyst at a big bank. That company had eventually been acquired for $400 million. Victor had made his first million before he turned 30. You've been successful your whole life, Giselle said. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be missing something? What am I missing? Something you can't buy. Something you can't invest your way into. He looked at her for a long moment. Like what? I don't know. I just think that people who've always gotten what they wanted sometimes don't know how to want something they can't get. He didn't answer. He took a sip of wine and changed the subject. After dinner, he walked her to the sidewalk. It was raining again. It seemed to always be raining in New York in December, and the streetlights cast long orange reflections on the wet pavement. I had a wonderful evening, he said. So did I. Come back to my apartment. It's 2 blocks from here. We'll have another drink. We'll talk more. Victor. I'm not asking you for anything, Giselle. I'm asking you for a conversation. She should have said no. Every rational impulse she had, the part of her brain that had gotten her into Columbia on a scholarship, that had built her career one careful decision at a time, screamed at her to walk to the subway, go home, and forget that this man existed. Instead, she said, lead the way. His apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a pre-war building on West 11th Street. It was impeccably decorated, warm woods, neutral tones, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, but it felt less like a home and more like a showroom. No photographs on the walls. No personal artifacts. Just beautiful, curated emptiness. He poured her a glass of scotch. She sat on his leather sofa and looked at the spines of his books, the biographies of presidents, histories of financial crises, a first edition Hemingway that she suspected he'd never actually read. This place doesn't feel like you, she said. What does that mean? It feels like a place someone designed to impress people. But you don't seem like the kind of man who needs to impress anyone. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody, expensive, understated. You're very perceptive, he said. Most people don't see through me. I've been trained to read people. It's literally my job. And what do you see? She looked at him. In the low light of the apartment, with the rain on the windows and the city humming distantly below, he looked less like a titan of the investment world and more like what he was, a man approaching 50 who had built an empire and was quietly, privately, terrified that none of it would outlast him. I see someone who's very good at what he does, she said, and very scared of what happens when he stops doing it. He was quiet for a long time. Giselle, he said finally, I'm not going to pretend this is simple. I know what I'm offering you isn't fair. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in years. I feel alive. I feel like the man I was before I became this. And what is this? A version of myself that everyone expects but nobody actually knows. She leaned in. She kissed him. It was not a hesitant kiss. It was not a kiss of uncertainty. It was the kiss of a woman who had spent her entire adult life making careful decisions and had finally decided, with full knowledge of the consequences, to make one very careless one. His hands in her hair. His mouth on her neck. The scotch on the table untouched and forgotten. The rain on the windows like a witness. That was the night it began. And even as it was happening, even in the heat of it, the surrender of it, some small, clear part of Giselle's mind was writing the story of how it would end. Hashtag Chapter 4. The cycle. The months that followed were the most exhilarating and the most miserable of Giselle's life. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, usually at his apartment, sometimes at hotels when his wife was in town. Victor was meticulous. He always checked the weather, always had a cover story ready, always knew the exact time the doorman's shift changed so they could slip in and out undetected. He was, in the vocabulary of their relationship, always in control. Except when he wasn't. The first fight happened in February, 6 weeks after that night in his apartment. Giselle had mentioned, casually, that her birthday was coming up at the end of the month. She'd said it lightly, almost as an aside, and he'd responded with enthusiasm, "We'll celebrate, of course," and she'd let it go at that. On Valentine's Day, which was 2 weeks before her birthday, she arrived at his apartment expecting dinner, perhaps roses, the kind of gesture that a man in his position, with his resources, with his experience, would naturally make for the woman he claimed to care about. He gave her an airport cosmetics bag and a box of Hershey's chocolate. She stared at the gift. A cosmetics bag. From an airport. The kind of thing you'd buy at a Hudson News newsstand because you'd forgotten it was Valentine's Day and the flight was boarding in 20 minutes. "Victor," she said, "isn't it nice? I know you mentioned you were running low on moisturizer, so I picked these up at JFK on my way back from Boston. The chocolate is from the good shop in the terminal. They have this dark chocolate with sea salt that's supposed to be incredible. You bought me airport chocolate. It's premium airport chocolate. For Valentine's Day." He looked at her, genuinely confused. "Giselle, I was on a plane for 5 hours and had to go straight to a board meeting. I didn't have time to what? Order flowers? Send a card? Maybe buy something from an actual store? Now you're being unreasonable." "I'm being unreasonable?" Her voice rose. "Victor, you've spent more on a single lunch meeting than that bag and chocolate box cost combined. I don't care about the money. I care that you didn't even try. What do you want me to say? I want you to care. I do care. About what? About me or about managing me? Because those are 2 very different things." He stood up and walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass. He pressed his forehead against the cool surface and was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You're right. I should have put more thought into it. I'll make it up to you." "How?" "I'll buy you that bag you mentioned. The one from the boutique on Madison. The Celine tote." Her heart jumped. The Celine tote. She'd seen it in a window on Madison Avenue 2 months earlier and had mentioned it in passing, not as a request, just as an observation. "That's a beautiful bag," she'd said. "I'll have to save up for it." "I'll buy it for you," he'd said then. "You don't have to, I want to." And now, 6 weeks later, with the airport chocolate sitting on his immaculate coffee table like evidence of something, he'd finally circled back to the promise. "The Celine bag," she said. "You'll actually buy it?" "Of course. I'll go this weekend." "I'll go with you." "No, you don't need to. Why not?" "Because I want it to be a surprise." "A surprise?" She laughed bitterly. "Victor, nothing about us is a surprise. We've been having the same conversation for 6 weeks. "I'll go on Saturday," he said firmly. "I'll get it. And we'll celebrate properly." Saturday came and went. He didn't mention the bag. When she asked about it on Sunday, he said he'd been delayed. His feng shui master had called and insisted he reschedule a meeting because the stars weren't aligned for purchases until the following week. Your feng shui master, she repeated. She's very specific about timing. I can't override her guidance. It would be bad luck. Victor, I've been with you for 4 months. You've bought me airport cosmetics and promises. And I've used my network to get you into a top firm. I've made introductions that took me years to build, and I've given them to you freely. Does that not count? Of course it counts. I'm grateful. But that's not the same as what? What do you want from me, Giselle? The question hung in the air like a verdict. She wanted to say, I want you to choose me. I want you to leave your wife. I want to be the most important thing in your life, not your best-kept secret. I want a man who will buy me flowers not because he felt guilty but because he thought of me. I want a man who will introduce me to his friends, who will hold my hand in public, who will build a life with me instead of hiding me inside one. Instead, she said, I want the bag. Then you'll have the bag. He left the apartment that night to drive back to Greenwich. She stood at the window and watched his car disappear into the rain. She told herself it was just a bag. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself that what they had was real, even if it was complicated, even if it was painful, even if it existed in the margins of someone else's life. The bag, when it finally arrived, 32 days later, after she'd stopped asking about it, came in a plain brown box with no note. She opened it alone in her apartment and found the tote, still in its dust bag, tags removed. It was beautiful. She put it on her bed and sat beside it and cried for an hour. ## Chapter 5. The passion and the reckoning. Despite everything, the stinginess, the broken promises, the constant emotional negotiation, Giselle could not stop. The physical part of their relationship was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Victor was attentive in ways that surprised her. He remembered how she took her coffee, which side of her neck was sensitive, the exact pressure she liked when he kissed behind her ear. He learned her body the way he learned to market, thoroughly, systematically, with a patience that was, in its own way, a form of respect. And she learned him. She learned that he was different in bed than he was anywhere else, less controlled, less careful, more present. In those moments he was not the VC, not the titan, not the man who measured every interaction in terms of ROI. He was just a man who wanted her, fully and completely, in a way that felt almost desperate. You undo me, he whispered to her once, afterward, when they were lying in the dark in his West 11th Street apartment, the city roaring outside like an ocean. Is that a good thing? I don't know. I've spent my entire adult life building walls. And you just walk right through them like they're not there. Maybe they shouldn't be. In my world, they have to be. The moment you let your guard down, someone takes everything. I'm not someone. I know. That's what scares me. They were reckless. They were stupid. They had unprotected sex, not once, not by accident, but repeatedly, because Victor said he didn't like the way condoms felt, and Giselle, who had spent her whole life being careful, who had a copper IUD that was supposed to make this exact scenario impossible, went along with it because she wanted to feel him, all of him, without any barrier between them. She took emergency contraception twice in a single month. The first time, in March, she'd woken up the morning after a night together with a cold dread pooling in her stomach. She knew the calendar. She knew the math. She took the pill within hours, before the window closed, and spent 2 days bleeding heavily and feeling like her body was punishing her for wanting something so badly. The second time was worse. That was in April, and the morning after pill made her sick, violently, miserably sick, and Victor had to leave his own apartment at midnight to drive her to a pharmacy because she was shaking too hard to walk. He held her hair back while she threw up in the parking lot, and then he drove her home and sat with her until 4 in the morning, stroking her forehead and saying, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," she said, her voice hoarse. "I know. You should wear a condom. I know. Do you know how dangerous this is? For me? I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll be more careful. You say that every time. This time I mean it. But meaning it and doing it were different things. And they both knew it." Hashtag chapter 6. The accident happened on a Thursday in May. They'd been arguing, of course they'd been arguing. The fight had started at lunch, when Giselle had texted Victor to say she was feeling lonely and wanted to see him, and he'd responded with a single word, busy. She texted back, "You're always busy." He replied, "I have a lice, Giselle. You knew what this was when we started." She stared at the message and felt something inside her crack, a fissure that had been growing for months and had finally, in that moment, become a chasm. She called him. He didn't answer. She called again. He answered on the 4th ring. "I can't keep doing this," she said. "Doing what?" "Being your secret. Being your convenience. Being the person you call when you're bored and ignore when you're not. This isn't the time, Giselle. It's never the time. It's never the right moment, never the right day, never the right month. It's been 8 months, Victor. 8 months of sneaking around in airport gifts and broken promises about bags that never arrive. I deserve more than this. What do you want me to say? I want you to say that I'm important to you. That I'm not just a convenient side thing that you keep around because the sex is good. You are important to me. Prove it. I'm not going to have this conversation over the phone." "Then when? Saturday? Next week? Next month? You have a meeting calendar that runs 3 months out, Victor. I could schedule you in for a filling slot between your dentist appointment and your son's lacrosse game." She heard him take a breath, the controlled, measured breath of a man who was very carefully not losing his temper. "I'm driving," he said. "I'll call you tonight. Don't bother." She hung up. She was driving too. She was on the West Side Highway, heading downtown, the phone still in her hand, her vision blurred with tears. She was going 60 miles an hour in heavy traffic, and she was not looking at the road. She was looking at the phone in her hand, waiting for him to call back, waiting for the words that would say something that mattered. The man on the bicycle came out of nowhere. He was in the bike lane, a thin, middle-aged man in a yellow reflective vest, and Giselle's car struck him at 42 miles per hour. The sound was unlike anything she'd ever heard, a thud so deep and final it seemed to come from the earth itself. She didn't remember the next 30 seconds. When she came back to herself, she was standing on the shoulder of the highway, her hands covered in blood, and a crowd had gathered and someone was on the phone with 911 and another person was kneeling beside the cyclist, who was lying motionless on the pavement. The cyclist's name was David Park. He was 53 years old. He was a CPA from Queens. He had a wife and 2 teenage daughters. He was taken to Bellevue Hospital with a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding. Giselle sat in the back of the ambulance while a paramedic cleaned the blood from her hands and asked her questions she could barely process. Yes, she had been distracted. No, she had not been drinking. Yes, she had been on her phone. She knew, even as she said it, that this was going to destroy her. Her phone rang. "Victor." "Where are you?" he said. "Are you okay?" "I just saw the news. There was an accident on the West Side Highway. They said it involved a silver BMW. That's me." Silence. "Then what?" "I hit someone. A man on a bicycle. I was looking at my phone. Because you wouldn't answer me. Because I was angry. Because of us. Giselle, he's alive. But he's in the hospital. He has a fractured skull, Victor. I put a man in the hospital because I was crying in my car." Another silence. When Victor spoke again, his voice had changed. It was harder, colder, the voice of a man who assessed damage and calculated risk. "I'm coming to get you." "Where are you?" "I don't know. Somewhere near the 30th Street exit, I think. Stay there. Don't talk to anyone without a lawyer. Do you understand? Don't say anything." "Victor, I'll be there in 20 minutes." He hung up. The lawyer, it turned out, was one of Victor's partners, a corporate defense attorney named Martin Shea who specialized in exactly these kinds of cases. He met Giselle at the scene, spoke to the police on her behalf, and within 2 hours had convinced the officers that she was not a danger to the public and should be allowed to go home. She was cited for reckless driving and use of a handheld device. The criminal exposure was minimal, the cyclist was alive, and the injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening. But the civil liability was another matter. David Park's wife retained a personal injury attorney, and within a week, Giselle was named in a lawsuit seeking damages in excess of $2 million. Victor paid for everything. The lawyer, the medical bills, the eventual settlement, all of it. He never asked her to repay a cent. He never held it over her either, not directly. But she knew, in the way she knew everything about him, that the accident and its costs had changed something in how he saw her. She had become, in his mind, a liability. An exposure. A risk that had materialized in the worst possible way. Chapter 7, the pregnancy in June. Her period was late. She was on her IUD, but the device had shifted once before, in college, resulting in an ectopic pregnancy that had ended in emergency surgery and a week in the hospital. She knew her body. She knew the signs. She took 4 pregnancy tests over the course of 2 days. All positive. She called Victor from the bathroom of her apartment, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the tests in a line on the counter like evidence. "I need to see you," she said. "What's wrong?" "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line lasted 11 seconds. She counted. "I'll come over," he said. He came over that night. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, gray around the edges, the lines in his face deepened by something that looked like fear. "Are you sure?" 4 tests. All positive. "And before you ask, yes, it's yours. There hasn't been anyone else." He sat down on the edge of her bed. He put his head in his hands. "This can't happen," he said. "Excuse me?" "Giselle. I'm a 48-year-old man with a wife, 2 sons, a reputation, a career. A baby with you would destroy everything. I'm not saying I want to keep it." He looked up. "What?" "I have a career. I'm 30 years old. I'm on the partner track at Meridian. A baby right now would derail everything I've worked for. Then terminate it." The words came out of his mouth so quickly, so cleanly, that it was clear he had already been thinking them. That in the 11 seconds of silence, he had not been feeling grief or fear or any of the emotions she might have expected. He had been calculating. You want me to have an abortion? I want you to make the right decision for your life. My life? Victor, this is your life too. My life is a house in Greenwich and 2 sons at college and a board seat on 4 companies. My life is a wife who has been with me for 22 years and who trusts me. My life is a story that ends one way, and this, he gestured at her stomach, at the tests on the counter, at all of it, this ends it a different way. So you want me to make it go away? I want you to be practical. The way you've been practical about everything else in your career. Practical. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That's what this is to you. A logistics problem. Giselle. No. Get out. What? Get out of my apartment. He didn't move. She picked up his coat from the chair by the door and threw it at him. I said get out. He stood. He put on his coat. He walked to the door. And then he turned back. How much do you need? Excuse me? For the procedure. How much do you need? She stared at him. Are you seriously asking me how much I'll charge you to have an abortion? I'm asking what you need to take care of this. $15,000, she said. It was the first number that came into her head. It was also, she knew, roughly the cost of a wedding she'd never have, a life she'd never live, a family that would exist only in the space between her and this man who could not love her enough to choose her. I'll transfer it tomorrow, he said. He left. She sat on the floor of her bathroom and wept until she couldn't breathe. She called Dana Whitmore the next morning and said she had a medical issue and needed the week off. Dana didn't ask questions. She was, Giselle thought, the mother she would never have. The procedure was quick, clinical, and devastating. Giselle went alone because Victor had an important board meeting in Boston that he could not reschedule. She lay on the table in the procedure room with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and thought about David Park in his yellow vest, and the way the earth had sounded when it received the impact of his body, and the way Victor had said $15,000 like he was negotiating a wire free. She went home. She slept for 14 hours. She woke up to a text from Victor, transfer sent. Are you okay? She didn't respond. Chapter 8, the 30th birthday on July 29th, Giselle Marchetti turned 30. She had planned, at the beginning of the year, to throw a party. A real one, a rooftop dinner in the meatpacking district, 80 people, a DJ, a custom cocktail named after her. She had a Pinterest board. She had a budget. She had sent save the dates in May. By July, she had cancelled everything. Not because of money. Not because of logistics. Because she could not bear the thought of standing in a room full of people pretending to be happy while the man she loved was 90 minutes away in Greenwich, eating dinner with his wife. Instead, she went to dinner with 3 close friends at a small restaurant in the West Village. They ordered too much wine and talked about their 20s like they were eulogizing the dead. Her friend Priya, a structural engineer from Mumbai who had been in New York for 8 years, said, 30 is when you stop pretending you have time and start pretending you have choices. The others laughed. Giselle didn't. At 10 o'clock, she went home. Her apartment was dark, quiet, and exactly the way she'd left it that morning. No decorations, no surprises, no candles on the cake she decided not to bake. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her couch and looked at her phone. She had received 47 birthday messages. 47. She had replies to write, gratitude to perform, a social media presence to maintain. 47 people who wished her well and had no idea that she was sitting alone in her apartment on her 30th birthday feeling like her life was a draft that had been rejected. She called Victor. "I need to see you," she said. "It's late. I'm in Greenwich. I don't care. I need to see you." A pause. "What's wrong?" "It's my birthday." "I know. Happy birthday. I was going to call you tomorrow. I have something special planned." "What?" "A weekend. At a hotel in the Hamptons. I booked the suite at Gurney's you've been talking about. 2 nights, all expenses paid. You'll love it." "Victor, the ocean is supposed to be incredible right now, and they have this new spa." "Victor, stop." He stopped. "I don't want the Hamptons," she said. "I don't want another promise. I don't want you to tell me about feng shui masters and busy calendars and all the reasons you can't do what I'm asking. I want you to answer one question, and I want you to answer it honestly." "Okay. Do you love me?" Silence. But this time it was different. This silence had texture, it had weight and depth and something almost like pain. "I care about you," he said. "More than I should. More than is safe for either of us." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." "Then I need you to leave me alone. Giselle, for a while. I need space. I need to think about whether I can keep doing this." "I'll give you space. But the Hamptons, forget the Hamptons." She hung up. She sat in the dock for another hour, and then she opened her laptop and wrote in a journal she'd kept since college, the kind of earnest, self-important document that 30-year-olds write when they're trying to convince themselves that their suffering has meaning. Today I am 30. I have a career that would have made my mother weep with pride. I have a body that men still notice. I have a mind that got me into Columbia and keeps me employed at a firm where they actually value me. And I have a man who gives me airport chocolate and $15,000 to fix his mistakes and tells me, when I ask him if he loves me, that he cares about me more than he should. I don't know how to want something smaller. I don't know how to want less. And I don't know how to want more, because the man I want more from has already shown me exactly what I am to him, a beautiful, expensive, low-priority distraction. At 30, I thought I would know who I was. Instead, I am a question I cannot answer. She closed the laptop. She went to bed. She did not cry. For the first time in months, she did not cry. Chapter 9, The Reckoning, August. The city was brutal, heat radiating from the pavement in waves, the subway an oven, every surface in her apartment holding the warmth of the day long into the night. Giselle went to work. She came home. She read books. She went for runs along the Hudson. She did not call Victor. He called her. Of course he called her. 3 times in the first week, twice in the second. She let each call go to voicemail and then listened to every one, tracking the evolution of his. Messages from confident, "Hey, it's me. Call me back when you have a moment," to concerned, "Giselle, I'm worried about you. Please just tell me you're okay," to irritated, "I don't understand what you want from me. I've given you space. I've been patient. I need you to communicate." On the 23rd day of her silence, he showed up at her apartment. She opened the door and found him standing in the hallway, 68 years old, of confidence and composure crumbling at the edges of his carefully tailored jacket, holding a bouquet of roses that looked like they'd been purchased at a bodega on the corner. "These are for you," he said. "They're wilting. I know. I've been standing outside for 20 minutes trying to decide whether to come in. That's a long time to stand in a hallway. I'm not leaving until we talk." She stepped aside. He walked in. He put the roses on her kitchen counter, looked around at her apartment, the neat bookshelves, the running shoes by the door, the single glass of water on the coffee table, and seemed, for a moment, to see it clearly for the first time. This was her life. Not his. Hers. "You've been working out," he said. "I've had a lot of time." "I'm sorry." She sat down. He remained standing. "I've been an idiot," he said. "Yes. I've been selfish. I've been controlling. I've treated you like something I could manage rather than someone He stopped. "Someone you what?" He sat down beside her. "Close, but not touching. The way you sit next to someone on a plane just before it crashes, close enough to matter, not close enough to fix anything." "I don't know how to be what you need," he said. "I've tried. For 2 years, I've tried. And every time I think I'm doing the right thing, I do the wrong thing instead. I buy you airport chocolate because I'm thoughtless. I avoid buying you the bag because I'm superstitious. I send you $15,000 like it's a bill I'm paying instead of a life I'm affecting. He paused, searching for the word. "I am a man who has built a career on reading people in markets, and I cannot read myself. I don't know what I want. You know exactly what you want. You want to keep everything. That's not fair. Isn't it? You want your wife. You want your sons. You want your life in Greenwich. And you want me. On the side. In the margins. A secret you can visit when it's convenient and put away when it's not. That's how I think of you. How do you think of me, Victor?" He looked at her, really looked at her, with the full weight of his attention, the way he looked at a pitch deck that could make or lose him $10 million. "I think of you," he said slowly, "as the one person in my life who makes me feel like I'm still becoming who I'm supposed to be, instead of just being who I've already built." That's a beautiful answer. But it's not enough. It will never be enough, will it? She reached for his hand. She held it. She felt the warmth of his palm, the slight tremor in his fingers, a man approaching 50 who was, in this moment, terrified of losing something he'd never properly held. "I need you to make a decision," she said. "I need you to decide if I'm worth the cost. Not the financial cost. The real cost. The cost of changing your life or the cost of letting me go. And if I can't decide, then I'll decide for you." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "I can't leave my wife," he said. "I've built this life. With her for 22 years. We have 2 sons. I owe her not because of some debt I've calculated, but because I made promises and I meant them. At the time, I meant them." Giselle nodded. She had known this. She had always known this. Hearing him say it was not a revelation. It was a confirmation of something she had been refusing to accept for 2 years. "But I can't let you go either," he continued. "I don't have the strength for that. And I know how selfish that sounds. I know how unfair it is. But I'm being honest, and honesty is the only thing I have left to offer you." "Honesty," she repeated. "You want to keep me as your honest mistake." He stopped. Started again. I want you to have what you deserve. A partner. A family. A life that isn't hidden. And I want to be part of your life in whatever way I can, for as long as you'll have me. That's not a decision. That's a deferral. It's the only answer I have. She let go of his hand. She stood up. She walked to the window. The city was glittering below, indifferent and alive, the way cities always are when your world is falling apart. I need time, she said. More time. To think. How much time? I don't know. A week. A month. I don't know. And in that time, you think about what you're willing to lose. And so do I. He stood. He put on his jacket. He walked to the door. Giselle? Yes. The bag. The Celine bag. I bought it 2 months ago. I've been carrying it in my briefcase for 8 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He paused. I'll leave it with Pauline. She'll send it to you. He opened the door. He left. She stood at the window and watched him walk to his car, a black Mercedes, parked in a no-standing zone, because Victor Ashford had spent so long believing that rules were for other people that he'd stopped noticing when he broke them. She watched him drive away. She watched until his taillights disappeared into the stream of traffic on Broadway. Then she went to her kitchen and looked at the roses. They were, she noticed, beginning to open. Even in their wilting, even in their imperfection, they were blooming. She buried her face in them and breathed in. Hashtag chapter 10. The fork in the road. September arrived with a crispness that felt like forgiveness. The humidity broke. The city exhaled. Giselle returned to work with something that felt almost like clarity, not peace, not resolution, but the particular energy that comes from finally standing at the edge of a decision you've been avoiding. She had lunch with Dana Whitmore at a Thai restaurant near the office. Dana, who was 53 and divorced and had raised 2 children as a single mother while building one of the most respected portfolio management teams on the East Coast, listened to Giselle's story, edited, careful, stripped of names and identifying details, with the focused attention of a woman who had heard 1,000 variations of this same story and understood, beneath all of them, the same core wound. So what do you want to do? Dana asked, sipping jasmine tea. I don't know. Part of me wants to stay. Part of me wants to walk away. Which part is louder? Right now? They're about equal. Dana set down her cup. Let me tell you something I've learned in 30 years of investing. You don't make money by holding on to things that depreciate. You make money by selling before the market turns and reinvesting in something with better fundamentals. This isn't a portfolio, Dana. Isn't it? You have assets, your youth, your intelligence, your career trajectory. You have liabilities, this relationship, which is draining you emotionally and distracting you from your work. The math isn't complicated, Giselle. The question isn't whether the numbers work. The question is whether you're willing to see them clearly. What if I love him? Then you love him. Love doesn't make bad math good. It just makes you reluctant to do it. Giselle laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. You're terrifying. I'm honest. It's a related skill. That night, she called Victor. I'm ready to talk, she said. Where? Your apartment. He was there when she arrived. The roses from August were gone, replaced, she noticed, by fresh ones. White, not red. A different kind of statement. I've been thinking, he said. So have I. You first. She sat on his leather sofa, the same sofa where, a year earlier, I want children. I want a partner who builds a life with me, not beside me. I want to be someone's priority, not someone's secret. And I'm realizing I've been waiting for you to become that person, and you're not going to. Not because you're a bad man, but because you're already someone else. You've already built that life. And I'm not it. Giselle, let me finish. I need to say this. I've spent 2 years negotiating for a seat at a table that was never going to have one for me. I've begged for gifts like they were proofs of love, when I know that a man who truly loves you doesn't make you beg. He gives because giving is what love does. She took a breath. The words she was about to say were the hardest she'd ever spoken. I need to walk away from this. From you. And I need you to let me. He didn't speak. He sat in the armchair across from her, his hands folded, his face a mask she couldn't read. I want to keep seeing you, he said finally. Not as it was. Differently. I want to, Victor. No. But no. I'm not going to be your fallback. I'm not going to be the woman you visit on Tuesday nights when your wife is traveling and you need something. I won't do that anymore. I deserve more than that. Then what do you want from me? Help me. Actually help me. Not with the career, I've built that myself. Help me by letting me go. Introduce me to people who can advance my career the way you did with Dana. Be a mentor, not a lover. Be a friend if you can. And then get out of my life so I can build the one I actually want. He was quiet for a long time. If that's what you need, he said, then I'll do it. You'll let me go? I'll let you go. She stood. He stood. They stood across from each other in his beautiful, empty apartment, and the distance between them felt like the sum of every distance they had failed to close over 2 years, the inches that had always been miles, the moments that had always been missed. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He couldn't speak. She walked to the door. She opened it. She stepped into the hallway. Giselle? She turned. The bag, he said. Pauline sent it to you? No. He looked stricken. I gave it to her 3 days ago. Then I never got it. He reached for his phone. She raised a hand. Keep it, she said. Sell it. Donate the money. I don't care. I don't want anything from you that I didn't earn. She left. She took the elevator down 4 floors and walked out onto West 11th Street into the September evening. The air smelled like change, like the end of something and the beginning of something else, though she couldn't yet name what the something else would be. She walked to the subway. She took the A train home. She made tea. She opened her laptop and, for the first time in months, updated her LinkedIn profile with a new headline, something bold, something true. Associate Director, Portfolio Management, Meridian Investment Partners, open to new opportunities. She hit save. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark of her apartment and breathed. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the moment after a long illness when you finally stop shaking and realize that you're still alive, and being alive, Even without love, even without resolution, even without the man who made $50 million and couldn't buy her a proper gift, was, in itself, enough. Epilogue. 1 year later, Giselle got the promotion to director in March. She led the due diligence on 3 of the firm's most successful mid-stage investments and was profiled, briefly, in a financial news outlet as one of the rising stars of New York's investment community. She was 31. She had a corner office on the 34th floor and a salary that made her mother's 2 jobs feel like a distant memory. She went on 3 dates in the spring, nothing serious, nothing that stuck, but she went, because Dana was right. You couldn't find something new until you sold what was weighing you down. Victor texted her occasionally. Birthday wishes. Holiday notes. Once, a LinkedIn message recommending a hedge fund contact who could help her with a specific deal she was working on. She accepted the introduction. She thanked him. She did not respond beyond that. She did not know, and did not want to know, what was happening in his life. Whether he was still in Greenwich, still in the city, still in the same marriage that had been the reason, or the excuse, for everything. She had stopped needing to know. That was, she thought, its own kind of victory. On the anniversary of the night she'd walked out of his apartment for the last time, she went for a run along the Hudson. The September air was cool and clean, the river catching the last of the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached and her mind was quiet, truly quiet, for the first time in as long as she could remember. When she stopped, she stood at the railing and looked out at the water and thought about David Park, whether he was okay, whether he'd recovered, whether he ever thought about the silver BMW that had changed both their lives on a rainy Thursday in May. She thought about the baby she'd never had. She didn't mourn it. She honored it, the way you honor something that was real but not meant to be, a life that existed briefly and silently in the space between 2 people who were never going to build a world together. She thought about Victor. She wished him well. She genuinely did. And then she let the wishing go, the way you let go of a breath you've been holding for too long. She ran the last mile home. She showered. She made dinner, salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of white wine. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. And began, for the first time, to write her own story. Not a story about a woman who loved a man who couldn't love her back. Not a story about negotiations and disappointments and the particular humiliation of fighting for something you were never going to win. A story about a woman who had been lost and who had found her way back. A woman who had learned, at 30, that some doors close so that others can open. A woman who had stopped asking a married man to be something he could never be, and had started asking herself what she actually wanted. She wrote late into the night. She wrote about the summit and the roses and the accident and the silence. She wrote about the $15,000 and the bag that never arrived and the pregnancy scare that changed everything. She wrote about standing at the window in Greenwich and knowing, finally, fully, with the clarity that only heartbreak can provide, that she was not meant to be someone's secret. She was meant to be the author of her own story. And as the clock passed midnight and the city hummed outside her window, Giselle Marchetti, 31 years old, director at Meridian Investment Partners, alive, whole, unapologetically ambitious, finally at peace, wrote the last line of the first chapter. Asterisk, she did not know where this story would end. But for the first time, she was the one holding the pen. Asterisk, the END word count, 15,000 words title. The VC who made $50 million and spent $15,000 to buy her silence. She was 30, he was 48. She wanted marriage. He wanted a mistress. Noah's awakening, where every story finds its moment. Chapter 11. The month after the first month without Victor was the hardest. Not because she missed him, though she did, in the particular way you miss someone who was never fully yours to begin with. She missed the anticipation of his texts, the electric charge of knowing he was on his way, the specific ritual of their clandestine meetings. She missed the version of herself that existed in his presence, sharper, more alive, more convinced that her life had a secret plot twist waiting just around the corner. But what she didn't miss was the noise. The constant, exhausting noise of negotiating, demanding, waiting, hoping. The emotional labor of maintaining a relationship with a man who was constitutionally incapable of meeting her where she was. She hadn't realized, until it stopped, how much energy she'd been spending on him, on the gap between what he said and what he did, on the endless calibration of how much to ask for, how much to accept, how much to pretend didn't matter. It was, she realized, like living in a house with a slow gas leak. You don't notice the poison until you step outside and breathe real air. In October, she went to a wedding. A colleague from work, a woman named Beth who was marrying a man she'd met on Hinge after 2 years of dates that had all ended badly. The ceremony was at a vineyard in the Hudson Valley, the kind of aggressively picturesque setting that made you believe in love whether you wanted to or not. Giselle wore the Celine bag, the one from Victor, the one Pauline had eventually sent after she'd told Victor to keep it, because some part of her couldn't bear to have nothing, couldn't bear to pretend that the 2 years hadn't happened. During the reception, Beth's mother cornered her. "You're at Meridian, right? My daughter speaks so highly of you. Are you seeing anyone?" "No," Giselle said. "Not right now." "Oh, you will. You're beautiful. You have such presence. The right man will come along." Giselle smiled and thanked her in thought. I know what it feels like to have a man who is technically available but functionally absent. I know what it feels like to love someone who can never love me back the way I need. And I would rather be alone than do that again. She didn't say any of that. She said, "I hope so," and went to find more champagne. She started therapy in November. Her therapist was a woman named Dr. Leena Chowdhury, a soft-spoken Bangladeshi American in her 50s who had a framed photo of Audre Lorde on her desk and a manner of speaking that made Giselle feel, within minutes of their first session, like she could say anything without being judged. "Tell me about the relationship that brought you here," Dr. Chowdhury said in their first session. Giselle told her. All of it, the summit, the roses, the airport cosmetics, the pregnancy scare, the $15,000, the accident, the last conversation in his apartment. She told it like a story she'd been carrying for a long time, a story she was finally handing to someone else because she couldn't carry it alone anymore. When she finished, Dr. Chowdhury was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You learned something important." "What?" "That you can survive loving someone who can't love you back. And that surviving it is not the same as accepting it." Giselle cried for the first 20 minutes of that session. She cried for Victor and for the baby and for David Park and for the 30-year-old woman standing alone in her kitchen holding a wilting bouquet. She cried for her mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads and had never once complained, and for her father, who'd left before Giselle could remember his face. She cried for every version of herself that had believed that if she just worked hard enough, loved hard enough, demanded hard enough, she could build the life she deserved. She cried until she was empty. And then, for the first time in a long time, she felt something that might have been the beginning of peace. Chapter 12. The dinner in December, 1 year after that first night in his apartment, Giselle went to dinner with Victor. Not as lovers. Not as whatever they'd been. As something else, 2 people who had loved each other badly and were trying, tentatively, to love each other as friends. He'd asked her. He'd sent a text in early November, "I'd like to see you." Not like before. Just dinner. "I'd like to know how you're doing." She'd thought about it for 3 days before responding. She told herself she was being careful. She knew she was being cowardly. They met at a restaurant in Gramercy, not the West Village, not his apartment, not anywhere that carried the weight of their history. A neutral space. A fresh start, or the closest thing to one. He looked good. That was the first thing she noticed, the same silver hair, the same easy posture, the same expensive watch catching the candlelight. But there was something different in his face. Something looser, maybe. Less tightly wound around whatever internal pressure had always defined him. "You look great," he said. "So do you. Cut your hair." "You noticed." "I notice everything about you. I always have." She looked at her menu. "Victor, I'm not here to try anything. I promise. I just wanted to see you. To see who you are now, outside of us." She ordered the risotto. He ordered the fish. They split a bottle of Sancerre and talked about work, her promotion, a deal she'd closed, a company he'd passed on that was now worth $2 billion. "How's your wife?" Giselle asked. The question was deliberate. She needed to hear his answer. "She's good. She started volunteering at the library. She's doing a book club." "And your sons?" "Drew is applying to law school. Marcus is thinking about a gap year. He wants to travel. I told him that's fine as long as he comes back with a plan." It was such a normal conversation. Such a normal life. The life he had chosen, the life she'd never been part of, the life that had been the invisible wall between them for 2 years. "I'm seeing someone," she said. She wasn't. But she wanted to see his face when she said it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh. Not seriously. But yes. Someone. Good. I'm glad." "You don't sound glad." "I am. I want you to be happy. I want you to have all the things I couldn't give you. Which are a family, a home, a man who can be there on your birthday without lying about where he is." He paused. "I mean that, Giselle. Even if it hurts." She believed him. That was the thing. After everything, the stinginess and the manipulation and the $15,000 that had felt more like a payoff than an apology, she still believes that he meant well. That he was, in his broken way, a good man who had been dealt a hand he didn't know how to play. "I know you do," she said. They finished dinner. He paid. He always paid, even now, even in this strange liminal space where their relationship had no name. "May I walk you to the subway?" he asked. "Sure." They walked through the December cold, their breath visible in the night air, hands in pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. At the entrance to the subway station, he stopped. "I want to thank you," he said. "For what?" "For loving me. Even though I made it hard. Even though I didn't deserve it. For 2 years, you made me feel like the best version of myself. And I will never forget that." She looked at him, this man who had been her obsession, her ruin, her lesson, her door to a world she would never have entered without him. She felt, in that moment, a tenderness so acute it was almost indistinguishable from grief. "Thank you for the introduction to Dana," she said. "That was real." That changed my life." He smiled. "That was all you. I just made the call." He leaned in and kissed her cheek, a gesture so ordinary, so uncharged, that it felt like a period at the end of a sentence. "Goodbye, Giselle," he said. "Goodbye, Victor." She descended into the subway. She rode the train home. She made tea. She opened her laptop and wrote in her journal, not about Victor, not this time, but about the risotto and the Sancerre and the way he'd looked when she told him she was seeing someone. She wrote about the future. She wrote about what she wanted next. And then she closed the journal and went to bed, and for the first time in a year, she slept through the night without dreaming. Hashtag chapter 13, the letter in January. Giselle receives a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual letter, handwritten, on heavy cream stationery that smelled faintly of sandalwood. The return address was in Greenwich. She recognized the handwriting immediately. "Dear Giselle, I started this letter 6 times. I kept throwing it away. I'm not good at saying things that can't be reduced to a pitch deck or a performance review. But you deserve more than my silence, so I'm going to try ***. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm writing because there's something I should have told you and didn't, and the longer I wait, the more it feels like a lie by omission. ***. A few months before we met, I had a health scare. Nothing serious in the end, but it forced me to confront something I've been avoiding. I am not going to live forever. None of us are. And the life I've built, the money, the reputation, the house in Greenwich is not, I realized in that moment, the same as a life well lived. ***. I met you at the tech summit 2 months later. And I know how this sounds, like I'm using my mortality as an excuse for the choices I made. Maybe I am. But I also know that you were the clearest proof I had that I was still capable of feeling something real. That I hadn't calcified completely into the man the world expected me to be. ***. You deserved better than what I gave you. Better than airport chocolate and broken promises and $15,000 that was supposed to fix something that money can't fix. You deserved a man who would choose you fully, publicly, without reservation. And I was never that man. ***. I want you to know that I don't regret loving you. I regret how I loved you, carelessly, selfishly, in ways that left you carrying more weight than you should have. But the love itself? No. That is one of the realest things I've ever had. ***. You're going to have an extraordinary life. I knew that the first time I met you, and I know it even more now. The world is going to see what I saw, a woman of uncommon intelligence, ambition, and heart. Someone who builds things that last. ***. Don't let anyone, not me, not anyone, make you feel like you have to shrink to fit into someone else's life. You were always meant for a bigger story than the one I could give you. With all my heart, Victor. P.S. The Celine bag. You never received it because I never sent it. I was a coward. I'm sorry. Giselle read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer beside her bed, and went for a run along the Hudson. The river was frozen at the edges, ice forming in thin white sheets along the shoreline. She ran until her lungs burned, until her thoughts were as clear and cold as the January air. She did not cry. She did not call him. She did not need to. She had everything she needed, the truth, finally, delivered a year too late. And with the truth, even the painful kind, even the kind that confirmed every suspicion she'd ever had, came something she hadn't expected. Permission. To let it go. To let him go. To stop carrying the weight of a store that had ended before she was ready to let it end. She ran home. She showered. She went to work. And that night, for the first time in 2 years, she dreamed about the future, not the past, not Victor, not the shape of a love that could never be, but the open, undefined, terrifyingly beautiful future that belonged entirely to her. Chapter 14. The new beginning. Spring came early that year. In March, Giselle traveled to San Francisco for a conference, her first time on the West Coast since she'd started at Meridian. She stayed at a boutique hotel in Soma and spent the days attending panels and the evenings walking the city, hands in pockets, absorbing the different rhythm of a place that ran on tech money and ambition, and the particular California faith that the future would always be better than the past. On the last night, she went to dinner at a seafood restaurant on Fisherman's Wharf with a man she'd met at the conference. His name was Marcus. He was 35, a partner at a growth stage fund in Palo Alto, and he had the easy, unperformed warmth of someone who'd grown up in California and had never quite learned to pretend otherwise. They talked for 3 hours. About markets and founders and the absurdity of series evaluations. About books and restaurants and the best hiking trails in Marin County. About their families. His mother was a retired school teacher, his father was a retired engineer, and they still lived in the same house in Berkeley where he'd grown up. "You're very easy to talk to," she said. "I think it's a California thing. We have low emotional defenses." "Very." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "It means friendly. I took Chinese in college. I forgot most of it, but I remember. I'm from New Jersey." "I know. I read your bio." She should have been put off by that. A man who'd researched her before their first date, that was the kind of thing Victor would have done, and Victor's version of research was always a prelude to manipulation. But Marcus wasn't calculating. He was curious. There was a difference. "I don't usually do this," she said. "Do what?" "Meet someone at a conference and talk for 3 hours like we're old friends. Like old friends who went to different colleges and only reconnect at reunions." "That's very specific. I went to a lot of reunions as a kid. My parents were social." She smiled. Outside the window, the bay was dark, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered coins. "I'd like to see you again," she said. "If you're ever in New York." "I'm going to be in New York in June. For a board meeting. Let me know." "I will." He walked her back to her hotel. At the door, he kissed her gently, without presumption, the way you kiss someone you're asked permission to know better. It was nothing like kissing Victor. It was better. It was honest. She went upstairs to her room and called her mother. "Mom," she said, "I think I met someone." Her mother, who had spent 20 years listening to Giselle talk about career goals and 5-year plans and the kind of strategic patience that made her an exceptional investor and a sometimes frustrating daughter, said, "Tell me about him." And Giselle did. She told her about Marcus, the easy warmth, the low emotional defenses, the way he'd said in a restaurant by the bay. She told her it was too early to know anything, that she wasn't ready to hope, that she was still healing from something she couldn't name. Her mother listened. And then she said, "You know what I've learned in 57 years?" "What?" "That the best things in life usually show up when you've stopped looking. Not because looking is bad, but because when you stop looking, you finally have room to see what's actually in front of you." Giselle was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm getting there," she said. "I know you are, baby. I know you are." She hung up. She stood at the window of her hotel room and looked out at the city, the bridge in the distance, the lights on the water, the whole sprawling possibility of the West Coast spread out below her like a map of a life she hadn't lived yet. She thought about Victor. She thought about the letter, the roses, the $15,000, the accident, the summit, the night he'd said you undo me and she'd believed him. She thought about 2 years of wanting something she couldn't have and finally, letting the wanting become its own kind of freedom. She thought about Marcus. The kiss by the hotel. The easy warmth. The word, which meant something like friendly but carried, in its sound, the suggestion of something softer. Something you could lean into without being cut. She didn't know what would happen. She didn't know if Marcus would call in June, or if the thing between them would grow into something real, or if she'd made peace with her past well enough to deserve a future. But she knew something she hadn't known at 30, something that only the hardest lessons could have taught her. She knew her own worth. She knew that she was not the sum of the men who'd loved her or failed to love her. She was the sum of what she'd built, her career, her character, her stubborn refusal to settle for less than she deserved. And she knew, with the calm, clear certainty of a woman who had finally stopped running from herself, that whatever came next, she was ready. She turned off the light. She slept. She dreamed of the ocean. ## final chapter, the morning after 1 year later. Giselle woke up in a bed that was not her own, in the best possible way. The morning light was coming through the curtains of Marcus's apartment in the village, casting long gold stripes across the hardwood floor. She could smell coffee and something baking. She could hear Marcus in the kitchen, the soft clatter of someone who moved through the world without apology. She stretched. She smiled. She got out of bed and pulled on his shirt, too big, smelling like him, like sandalwood and clean laundry and the particular comfort of someone who had become, over the past year, her home. She walked to the kitchen. He was standing at the counter, shirtless, in sweatpants, reading something on his phone while the oven hummed behind him. "Morning," he said, looking up. "Morning. Coffee's ready. Blueberry muffins in the oven, should be another 5 minutes. You're baking." "I'm multitasking. It's a new skill I'm developing." She poured herself coffee. She leaned against the counter and watched him, the easy way he existed in his own space, without performance, without calculation, without the invisible armor that Victor had worn like a second skin. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked up. "What?" "I got the call yesterday. They're making me partner." He set down his phone. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps. He pulled her into a hug so tight she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. "I knew it," he said. "I knew they would. You've been incredible. It doesn't feel real. It is real. It's the most real thing." She held him. She breathed him in. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the summit, the roses, the accident, the silence, the letter, the year of healing, the dinner in San Francisco, the months of learning to trust again. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been before she became this one, and she felt, in that moment, not grief for any of them, but gratitude. She was 32 years old. She was a partner at one of New York's top investment firms. She was in love with a man who baked blueberry muffins on Sunday morning and who said when he wanted to tell her she was wonderful. She was building a life that was hers fully, openly, without hiding, without negotiating, without the particular loneliness of loving someone who could never fully love her back. She was, she realized, happy. Not perfect. Not painless. Not free of the scars that Victor had left, the scar of the pregnancy she'd never had, the scar of the accident, the scar of 2 years she'd never get back. But happy. Genuinely, quietly, durably happy. And that, she thought, was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Marcus kissed the top of her head. "The muffins are ready," he said. "Of course they are. I told you." Multitasking. She laughed. She pulled away and reached for a muffin and bit into it, warm, sweet, tasting like blueberries and butter and the particular promise of a Sunday morning in New York when everything, finally, was exactly as it should be. She looked around the kitchen, the sunlight, the coffee, the man she loved standing beside her in his sweatpants, and she thought about the story she would someday tell. Not a story about a VC who made $50 million and spent $15,000 to buy her silence. Not a story about a woman who loved a man who couldn't love her back. Not a story about airport chocolate and broken promises and the long, slow heartbreak of waiting for someone to choose her. A different story. A truer story. A story about a woman who had been lost and then found her way home. A woman who had learned the hard way, the only way that ever really teaches you anything, that some doors close so that others can open. A woman who had stopped asking the world for permission to want what she deserved and had simply, finally, claimed it. The muffins were perfect. The morning was golden. And Giselle Marchetti, 32 years old, partner, in love, finally at peace, reached for a second muffin and smiled. The END final word count, 15,000 words title. The VC who made $50 million and spent $15,000 to buy her silence. She was 30, he was 48, she wanted marriage, he wanted a mistress. Noah's Awakening, where every story finds its moment. ## additional scene, the 30th birthday. The night she didn't celebrate after she hung up on Victor, Giselle sat on her couch in the dark and stared at her phone. 47 messages. 47 people who had taken 30 seconds out of their lives to think about her, to type a few words, to send them hurtling through the digital ether and trust that she'd receive them. 47 people who had no idea that she was falling apart. She scrolled through them. Birthday wishes from colleagues and college friends, from her mother and her aunt, from a former roommate who'd moved to Berlin and a guy she dated once at 26 who turned out to be gay and was now one of her closest friends. Each message was a small act of love. Each one was, in its own way, a recognition. You matter. I see you. You're worth remembering. She replied to each one. Not with the standard "thank you so much" that birthday replies demanded, but with something real. A memory. A joke. A genuine expression of gratitude. She had learned, in her therapy sessions with Dr. Chatterley, that small acts of connection were how you rebuilt yourself, brick by brick, message by message, muffin by muffin on a Sunday morning. By the time she finished, it was midnight. Her actual birthday was over. The day she'd been dreading for months, the day that would officially mark her as over the hill in an industry that worshipped youth, had come and gone without fanfare, without celebration, without the man she loved most in the world saying the words she'd spent 2 years waiting to hear. She thought about going out. There were bars open, clubs pulsing with energy, streets full of people who didn't know and didn't care that a woman in a small apartment in the West Village was quietly, privately, having the worst birthday of her adult life. But she didn't go out. She stayed home. She made a list instead. Not a to-do list. Not a career goal list. Not the kind of strategic planning document she lived by. This was different. This was a list of everything she wanted that she wasn't getting. Every unmet need, every unfulfilled promise, every silence that had grown teeth over 2 years of waiting for a married man to become someone he couldn't be. The list looked like this. 1. I want to be someone's priority, not their secret. 2. I want a man who gives me gifts because he thought of me, not because he felt guilty. 3. I want a man who will introduce me to his friends without checking his calendar first. 4. I want to stop counting the days until he calls. 5. I want to have children before it's too late. 6. I want to stop feeling like I'm auditioning for a role but was never going to be mine. 7. I want to stop loving someone who loves me the way he can, instead of the way I need. 8. I want something smaller than what I'm asking for, or bigger than what he's offering. 9. I want to stop lying to myself. 10. I want to be happy. She looked at the list. She felt, strangely, lighter. There it was, all the things she'd been carrying in the dark, written out in black and white, named at last, no longer able to hide in the margins of a life that was too full of other people's expectations to make room for her own. The list wasn't a solution. It was a diagnosis. And sometimes, Dr. Chatterley had taught her, the first step toward healing was simply admitting what was broken. She folded the list. She put it in the drawer with the Celine bag receipt and the text messages she'd screenshot and the one photo she had of the two of them, taken secretly, poorly, at a party where he'd been holding her waist and pretending, for a moment, that they were just a normal couple like everyone else. She closed the drawer. She went to bed. She didn't cry. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't cry on her birthday. She didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything. Additional scene, the night of the pregnancy. What Giselle never told Victor, she never told him the full truth about the night she took the first pill. It was March, a Thursday, and she'd woken up that morning knowing, the way women sometimes know, in their bones, before any test can confirm it, that something was different. Something had changed. Something was growing inside her that had no name yet, no future yet, and no father willing to claim it. She called the gynecologist at 7 a.m. They couldn't see her until 3 p.m. She spent the day at work, sitting at her desk, smiling at colleagues, answering emails, performing the role of a woman who was not, at that moment, holding her breath and hoping her period would come. It didn't. At 3 p.m., she took 3 pregnancy tests in the bathroom of the Meridian office. 3 positives. 3 pink lines that appeared almost instantly, like verdicts. She sat on the closed toilet lid for a long time. She thought about Victor. She thought about her career. She thought about her mother, who'd raised her alone, who'd worked double shifts for 18 years, who would have given anything to have had the opportunities Giselle had been handed. She thought about David Park, Phil in physical therapy, still relearning how to walk, whose life she'd nearly ended because she'd been crying in a car on the West Side Highway. She thought about the baby. The potential person. The cluster of cells that was, at that moment, the most real and the most impossible thing she had ever carried. She didn't want it. She wanted it desperately. She was terrified of it. She ached for it. All of these things at once, contradicting and confirming each other, until she didn't know what she felt except that she couldn't breathe. She took the morning after pill the next day. She went to work the day after that. She told Victor it was nothing, just a scare, handled, no need to worry. She never told him that for 2 hours, from the moment she took the test in her office bathroom to the moment she swallowed the first pill, finally,